It's all right. There's a load of spare cables there at the moment. There's a load of spare ones around at the moment. Yeah, amazing, isn't it?
No, this is the.
Yeah.
Right, we'll get started. So my name is John Pantis. Most of you will know me, but if you don't, I'm national co-chair of COMP and chair of Leeds COMP. And first of all, I'd like to thank you all very much for coming. I know there's people who come down from the northeast, which is great, from Halifax, Huddersfield, Bradford, York. So that's really good that it has a northern flavour to it. It was organised by Leeds Keep Our NHS Public, but also through our Yorkshire Health Campaigns Together network. And there's a lot of clashes, as people will know, with other activities going on today with the weekly Palestine March and an environmental conference in Leeds, no doubt many other things as well. So I think we've actually got a very good turnout. On the hoardings over there, you'll see there's an exhibition which is to do with privatisation, particularly focusing on Leeds. So have a look at that if you haven't seen it already. The break that we'll be having, which will be at about 3:15. So we've got 4 speakers before then a break. And then the rest of the meeting is really aimed at having a discussion about how we campaign for the NHS, particularly in this new environment where we've got a new government who many of us would have hoped would have been much more supportive of restoring and rebuilding the NHS along the lines that COMP has argued for, but we don't really seem to be in that place, and there's a lot of worrying information coming out, I think, about the Labour Party's approach to the NHS. So we do want to have quite a lot of time for discussion. Now, what I'd like people to just to think about is whether you would like to break into 2 groups. We didn't know how many people would be coming, but we do have access to the room through there, so we could split into 2. If people think that would be useful. On the other hand, you might feel there's not a huge number of people here, so we could have the discussion in the space that we are now in, sitting around the tables. But just have a think about that and make your views known perhaps at the beginning of the break if you have strong views one way or another. As always, I'd particularly like to thank Gilda, who won't like me thanking her, but she's, as always, has done a tremendous amount of work to set up this meeting. And also Nick, who's down at the front there, who's managing the IT for us, who's come up from Guildford and used to be in comp quite a few years ago, still is in comp, used to be in Leeds comp. So it's lovely to have and to see a lot of faces, campaigning faces that I recognise very well from NHS campaigning over recent years. So the idea is that the speeches will be relatively short, around 10 minutes, and I think we'll take a few questions after each one if there are any burning questions, but I hope that they will all generate discussion in the session after tea. Mentioned to Unite Community as well, who've turned out to support today. They're always been out on the picket lines and always very active, so it's good to see them too. So the first speaker I'd like to introduce is Rhian Wita, who is a senior sister who works at Leeds Infirmary, an RCN steward, very involved with the nurses' strike, and who we met repeatedly on picket lines as well as demonstrations that Comp organised. So it's very nice, Rhian, that you could come today, and you're going to talk, amongst other things, about staffing issues, I think. Rhian's got a very poorly ankle, so thank you very much for coming today. I hope that was sorted out.
Yep.
So for anyone who doesn't know me, I recognise a lot of faces. It's really lovely to see you all. My name's Rhian. I am a senior sister. Got lots of titles. I want to tell you everything that I do. I work at LGI. I am an RCN steward, a health and safety rep, and I'm on the RCN Trade Union Committee, trying to fight as hard as I can for our NHS and for nursing. Have I missed them? No. So I thought I was looking at what I was going to speak about, and often when I go and talk about the NHS, I try not to write a speech because it's all here. So I've been working in the NHS for 26 years and I absolutely love her. I love what she does, I love what she's about. I don't like the way she's been treated. Okay, so I thought I'm just going to go through a little timeline. So some of this you'll already know, but bear with me, there is a point to it. So in 1948 we had Clement Attlee, who set up the NHS. In 83 we had Thatcher, who introduced competitive tendering to outsource services like portering and kitchens to cleaning and private companies. In 88 we had Oliver Letwin, a privatisation expert at Rothschild Bank, who wrote Britain's Biggest Enterprise, a manual on how to privatise the NHS through the stealthy and gradual introduction of trusts, private companies, charges, profits and health insurance. There does become a theme through all of this. In 91 we had Major bringing in the NHS and Community Care Act, introducing an internal market to the NHS with a purchase provider split. In 92 the Tories introduced PFI. I don't need to say any more on that. 97 we had Blair, who dubs Labour's tradition of support for public service and opts for privatisation and deregulation, funding 100 new hospitals under PFI, £12.7 billion. In 2000 we had New Labour's NHS plan, which introduced privatised provision of medical services to modernise the NHS. I remember a lecturer at the time wrote a book called NHS Modern Dependable, and there's a lot of facts in that book. Anita Fact-Shit, fantastic book. 2003, New Labour allows NHS trusts to apply to become foundation trusts, essentially arm's length business entities, all about business and how they can create more money. 2004, New Labour brings in payment by results. Payment by results. Do we fix the leg? Do we cure someone of pneumonia? 2009, Gordon Brown brings in the unsustainable provider regime, the framework for using PFI hospital debt burden to close and sell off publicly owned NHS land. In 2012, we had Cameron and Clegg in their Condemn coalition, bringing the Health and Social Care Act and abolishes the legal foundation of the NHS. NHS England, the essential birth and uprise of NHS England. In 2013, the Conservative Lib Dem coalition replaces primary care trusts with new GP-run CCGs. We all know about CCGs. 2014, appoints Simon Stevens, former head of the global division of American health insurance giant United Health, as the chief executive of NHS England. He published his 5-year forward view. He reduced the number of full A&E hospitals, GP surgeries, he closed smaller hospitals, shrink provision of expensive, high-risk, unprofitable healthcare. So what we're saying there is people equals money, unprofitable healthcare. Consolidate low-risk routine planned healthcare ahead of outsourcing. So that's where we went to privatisation, even harder. They rolled out STPs in 2015 to 2017, integrated care systems. In 2016, junior doctors strike over new contracts, which have adversely affected their pay back then. Exercise Alice, a dry run of how the NHS would respond to a coronavirus-like pandemic. That's in 2016. Identifies the need for more trained NHS personnel, beds, and get this, PPE. In 2016, we identified that we would need PPE, as well as the need to maintain contact tracing, patient isolation capacity, and both May and Stevens failed to implement any of the recommendations. In 2018, commissioning capabilities run by United Health. It's an exercise to aspiring to be bigger and better, be a bigger and better business. In 2019, a major new contract for GPs means they group together to form primary care networks. Under Johnson, in 2020, the decision by May's government and Simon Stevens not to prepare for pandemics, well, we know that story. People died. In 2021, the Conservatives' Health and Care Bill revises the number of ICSs, the integrated care systems, and each board will serve private corporate interests. The Health and Care Act in 2022 puts them on a legal footing and they start operating throughout England, effectively denationalising the English NHS. English NHS, a bit of a tongue tie. Waiting list top 7 million, the highest since records began. And in 2023, junior doctors and nurses went on strike for full pay restoration after losing at least 30% of their pay since the inception of the Tories in 2010. So that's my little timeline. It wasn't a little timeline, but it's a bit of a shocking timeline. And I don't know if any of you noted, but what was missing out of that timeline? People. At no point in that timeline did anything talk about the reason the NHS was set up. The reason the NHS was set up to look after people, for us to care and provide care for people, to make them better, to support them through illness. That is why we are there, and they are still trying to destroy that. You've seen my leg. My crutches are just there. I'm still at work. I don't want to be anywhere else. The night it happened, I sat on the floor in the middle of the street. No, I wasn't drunk. I don't drink. Everyone says, were you drunk? No, I wasn't drunk. I sat on the floor in the middle of the street. If anyone has got me on Facebook, you'll have seen this story, so I'm sorry. And called 999. And because I wasn't actively bleeding, I had to sit in the middle of the street for a minimum of 4 hours. Fortunately, my husband's really strong and helped me get up off the floor and sat me in the back of the camper van and took me to A&E. But 4 hours. I don't know who I felt more sorry for, me or the poor call handler on 999 who was absolutely devastated to tell me that I'm really sorry and I know you can't move your foot and I know it's like a balloon in front of you and I know you can't feel the end of your foot, but we've got nobody. We've got nobody out there. They have ruined our NHS. People keep saying that we shouldn't use words like the NHS is broken. Why not? Oh, the NHS is still doing wonderful work. Have you spoken to any of the NHS staff? I'm proud to say that I'm a frontline NHS nurse. What I'm not proud to say is the NHS is my staff, me, we cannot carry on working the way we are. So as a nurse, and many of you will have seen me on the picket line, I've got a real gob. I was just saying to David, I didn't realise I had that kind of mouth on me before. But it's used in a really good way to shout for the NHS, to shout for nursing. And do you all know that the RCN have recently rejected the pay award? So it was an award, so we have been awarded it. And I just want to share with you, and I'd like you to share with other people, that myself and other members of my team, and probably the members in the trust, we've all had our tax codes changed now this month. The pay award was that late, the HMRC now think that we've got a £1,000 a month pay rise. Of my pay award that I received from April, so I'm a band 7, I'm what you call a senior but junior manager. I received £302 for 7 months pay award. So, absolute shame. It is an absolute shame. Our band 2 staff, the crux of the NHS, the people that are providing the care, because of the uplift in national minimum wage, are going to be 10 pence below national minimum wage for the work they do, for the tears they cry when they come into the hospital, and for the tears they cry during the shift. The amount of times, my heart's racing now just thinking about it. People come up to me and say, "Miriam, we can't do it, we can't do it." And I'm like, okay, just calm down, it's okay, tell me what you can't do. We've got 8 people that need turning to our, and if we don't turn them, they're going to get pressure damage. And we're going to cause them harm, and then we've got to fill in an incident form, and then we've got to apologise to say we're really sorry that we caused you harm. The people that are above us are not listening, and I don't mean my trust. I mean the people. I mean West Streeting. I did a Channel 4 interview during the strikes, and West Streeting was there in person, and the Tory party chose to join us on Zoom. She couldn't hear me. She kept saying, "I'm sorry, I can't hear you." It was really strange. I don't think there was anything wrong with her hearing. I think she just didn't want to answer my questions.
Could you hear the presenter very well?
Oh yeah, she could hear him absolutely fine, and he did say that himself. It was Christian Guru Murthy, and he kept saying, "Oh, you can hear me, all right." It was fabulous. At the end of it, Wes Streeting came up to me. He put his arm on my arm, and he said, "Thank you for that." And I said, "For what?" "For giving it to a Tory." And I said, "I beg your pardon?" "For giving it to a Tory." And I said, "I haven't given anything to a Tory." I said, "But I'm about to give something to you." I said, "If you expect me to vote for Labour in a general election, you've got another thing coming." "What do you mean?" "Let's connect," he said. "Okay. Do you have Twitter?" "Yeah." So we tweeted him, did myself and another colleague who'd been to this Channel 4 interview. By the way, I've got to tell you this bit. I was sat there and Christian put me at the very front. And then he said to me, the whole thing from Big Brother, "You're live on Channel 4, please do not swear." And I looked at him and said, "You had no idea this was live, did you?" And I went, "No." That just reminded me of a bit of a flashback. But yeah, so and I knew at that point that this guy was not a person who was there to support the NHS. We now know that he wants to bring, is it the Japanese system? It's definitely, it's either Japan or China, where he wants to bring in an IT system into the NHS that's going to make things run better. Well, the NHS has already got the IT systems, thanks. What it's not got is the staff to run the IT systems. I don't know how aware anybody is about this, but there's 46,000 nursing vacancies across the NHS right now. We're in a vacancy freeze. Newly qualified nurses cannot get a job. There are no jobs being advertised. Do you know why? Until we can prove we can save money, then we're not getting any more nurses. I'm not kidding. I am not kidding. We are so on our knees that it's ridiculous. They're looking at a workforce who, I don't think winter's ever gone away. It's mad. I was looking at that. It's been winter in the NHS since 2010. It's worse than that. It's absolutely horrendous. And I think if it wasn't for keep our NHS public and oh, it's gone out my head. You know the thank you. You know what I meant. Yeah, health campaigns together. All of the support that the NHS get, I really don't know where we'd be, because I do try and share all of this with our staff and tell them that there's lots of love out there for the NHS, but the NHS is broken. It's absolutely broken. And yes, we are doing good work, but believe me, it's on the goodwill of the people. It's not because we are properly funded. The government, the Labour government disappoint me just as much as the Tory government have done. I've got no faith in them. If they wanted to save the NHS, they have had ample time to do it. Their reports of how much money they're going to put into it, where we've just gone through a timeline, and all the governments are bothered about the money side of it. We are not money. There is no price to put on a human life. The NHS belongs to us, and I know that I'm going to fight for it, even if my legs in a boot. So yeah, I hope that's all right. Keep fighting, keep by our sides. We need you. We definitely need you. More than ever. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Leanne, and yeah, depressing, but very good to hear from someone from the front line. Are there any questions, Leanne? Any burning questions for Leanne? Greg.
Thanks, that was great, very moving. My assumption is that the people you work with and other nurses like you throughout the NHS are very, very familiar with the kind of everyday pressures and the broken system that they are supposed to hold up. And they will be very, very aware that the pay deal, the strike didn't actually resolve the pay issue. What I want to know is, to what extent is the rest of the context that you spoke about understood by the workforce in your experience, and to what extent is it understood by your union, the RCN? Because that seems to me to be what this is actually about. You know, we can't resolve this simply by saying how terrible it is and how, you know, good people are being screwed by the system. We know that. But we do need to understand who's actually on our side. And I'm very curious whether they do understand that. Thanks.
Sorry, we haven't got the other mic working.
Thank you. So I think from the perspective of the Royal College of Nursing, I do believe that that's really well understood. I think the makeup of the RCN, there are a lot of nurses in the RCN and a lot of RCN workers. We've got over 550,000 members, a lot of who are in the NHS. I do think that, I was talking to Amber about it earlier on, before I got so much into this kind of union work, I've always been in the union, but until I started on the picket line and everything like that, I wanted to get more involved. But it's being involved that's really opened my eyes. And sometimes I do think the same thing, how can we be sure that the same message is getting across to people? Because something like a 5.5% pay rise to a skint nurse or nursing part of the nursing team is a lot of money. And I don't always think that they recognise what we are fighting for. I think our managers, and again, I'm not referring to my trust, I'm referring to NHS England more than anything, are very good at covering up what's going on. And unless we see things like the timelines that I've just read out, it's hard for nurses to understand. I think it's growing, and I think this winter it will grow a lot, because the staffing issues have already started. You know, the trusts have levels that they're not allowed to go below. Well, I can guarantee there'll be trusts all over today that are below the levels. And I think it's going to be a case of when the staff actually start seeing and feeling it, then that's what's going to make them come on board with us even more. But the RCN were the only union this time to reject the pay award. So it is up to us to now take that forward with our members and see where we go with that. We just need to get, our struggle really is getting more people on board and getting them to understand. So it's a fair question, and I don't know the answer on how to get them to do it either. Other than things like keep our NHS public and meetings like this. Just need to raise awareness, have the conversations when we're out and about.
Thanks.
Thanks for that incredible talk that you gave us. My name's Mike Galvin, and I'm
part of member of Leeds Comp. And I think my question fits in with what Greg has been asking about. Do you think that part of the solution is twofold? One, to have grassroots democracy throughout the NHS, and secondly, I don't know how many unions are involved in the NHS, but there are many unions. But why don't they? I discovered on the picket line that the BMA is not under the umbrella of the TUC. Isn't there a case for all of the unions to, as far as the NHS is concerned, operate as a single entity, so that and to have true grassroots democracy throughout, not just in the NHS, but all workplaces, but the NHS in particular? That's what we're here to talk about today. Thank you.
Thank you. So as far as the RCN is concerned, they're not under the TUC either.
No.
And that was a debate at our Congress last year, where we talked about whether or not anyone should join the TUC. And I have to say that at the time, we had two queues, one for, one against. I can now see why the RCN functions better, not as part of the TUC at this point in time. And my example for that would be the review board, the peer review body, that is apparently independent, but is made up of a lot of government workers as well. We were able to go to the peer review body and give evidence independently, whereas the unions that do fall under the TUC, they didn't do that. So I know that's probably seems quite a shallow reason, but I can see the benefits for us at this point in time to not be part of the TUC. Although I do understand where you're coming from as well, because that was my perspective when I stood up and spoke for the Congress.
In an ideal world, in an ideal world.
Yeah, in an ideal world, definitely. I think that would be the way forward, because I think that will provide some unity and us able to give a bigger fight, because as it stands at the minute, we are the only union that's rejected the pay award. So we are kind of out there on a limb, but
You shouldn't be out on them.
no.
That's right. So one more question from Reinhardt, and then
Yeah,
we'll-
Reinhard Hus, I used to work as a public health academic and long time ago in the NHS. Thank you for your very moving stories. What I wanted to ask you is, I mean, what the Trump election victory, I think, should have taught us, that you need to appeal to emotions in order to wake up the public. So lots of your stories, I wanted to ask, are you allowed, and other frontline staff, able to put them on what YouTube in short moving stories to say that if you want this or if you want this type of NHS, are you allowed to do it? And have you got sort of from the trade union or anybody support to do it and put out these sort of frontline stories to the general public in order to wake them up? Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, we are. We just have to be really careful that we don't identify our employers, obviously, because, and I've got to say this, and I genuinely mean this, it isn't my direct employer's fault, the state the NHS is in. They can only do what they can do with what they've got. But yes, we are, and to be fair, in the strikes, if you look me up, there is a few of me doing that, with NHS workers saying no as well. But we are allowed to do it. It's just we've just got to be careful from an employment perspective. Thank you. Yeah.
Thanks very much once again, Rhian, and I'm sure there'll be a lot of discussion about what you said later on. I should thank the Unison Health branch in the Leeds Teaching Hospital Trust, who've actually funded the venue today, so that was very generous of them. We do very supportive, fantastic that they actually paid for the cost of the venue. A shout to Neil Terry as well, who's over there. He has taken some photos. You may take some more. Neil's on all progressive demonstrations because he supports progressive causes, but he's also a great photographer. And hopefully we'll take some good pictures today. And one thing I didn't mention is that when this meeting is finished, if there is anyone who wants to come and have a drink in the pub, we're going to the Town Hall Tavern, which is just on the other side of the road from Leeds Town Hall, our usual pub. In fact, all the pubs locally having been shut down, but the town hall tavern is still open. So for our next speaker, I'd like to ask Amber from Corporate Watch. Some of you, I think, were on the No Palantir meeting, No Palantir in the NHS meeting the other night. And if you were, you would have heard Amber speak. She's done some very interesting work with Corporate Watch on privatisation and is going to talk about that.
Can people hear me when if I'm speaking like this, or would you prefer hands up? Use that better. Okay, yeah, I'm just not used to the microphone trend. Anyway, I'll use it. Hi, thanks. I don't want to go on after Rianne. She's so good at speaking. Yeah, thank you. Amazing timeline, and yeah, talking about it from like what it feels like from the personal frontline level. I think that's really important. I'm going to get a bit more impersonal and talk to you a little bit about researching NHS privatisation. So I'm Amber O'Sullivan, and I've been working with Corporate Watch, which is a anti-capitalist research organisation. We're kind of small, but we've been going since the 90s, and we do public, but also kind of behind the scenes, discrete research for campaign groups, grassroots organisations, unions, different things like that. One of the focuses for the last year, which I've been mainly working on, is NHS privatisation. And one of the projects that's come out of that, one of the campaigns, has been the No Palantir, the NHS campaign. Happy to share more information about that later if anyone's interested, but that's not going to be the focus of today. So our, like, what would you call it, like, slogan is information for action. So it's about being like really strategic about what we're doing when we talk about fighting back against NHS privatisation. And it's about doing it in a kind of a systematic way so that we get better at it, so that we can share the systematic ways with each other, and we can understand kind of what we're up against. Do you mind going to the next one? Thank you. Or the one back. So NHS privatisation is, like, in one way, for me anyway, in one way quite simple, because privatisation is like, it's a specific thing. It works similar in other sectors that are being privatised. It's a function of capitalism. It's an ideological move, but also when it comes to the NHS, it's quite specific because there's so many different moving parts. And that, like, timeline that Rianne was talking about, like, there's different moments in the last few decades, different acts, different bits of legislation, different people involved that have meant that it looks the way it does now. So it's really important to understand the mechanisms for how it's been privatised, like how it happens. We need to know how it happens so that we know how to push back against it. We need to understand how we build alternatives. So I'm going to go a little bit into some of how we do that, but keep in mind we do trainings like this and they can take a whole day or a whole weekend. So what I'm doing now is not going to do it justice, but I'm just going to give you a tiny little flavour about how we do it at Corporate Watch and how we have been doing it and how we've learned to do it alongside campaigners and organisers over since the 90s. So, oh yeah, this picture, so we've got, this one here is a map. This was just examples of some resources that are available online. Maybe people recognise them. Do people recognise these two images? Shout out if you do. No? Okay, so this one here with all the red things on it, that's a map of private companies who've got contracts in Britain to run clinical services. That's a map that you can access that's been put together by every doctor. It just has the names of the companies on it. And then over here on the other side, there's Tussle, who do kind of data reporting stuff. That's a kind of a visualized map of the health tech companies that are the bigger ones, are the ones getting quite a lot of money from NHS contracts. So an example, everyone in here is going to have an example of something else. So I guess it's about, like, sharing those resources with each other. And I'm happy to share, like, all the resources that we use, but I don't have them all here today. But anyone wants to, I can, like, get them all in an email and send them out to John or Gilda, who can pass them on. Could you go to the next slide? Thank you. So a little bit about how we've been doing it, all under the heading kind of follow the money, I guess. So we've been looking at who's been creating legislation, looking at the details of that legislation, the people involved, the private companies involved in legislation as well. So the NHS, like everyone probably here knows, uses a lot of consultants, but big consultants. And there's a lot of people involved in creating the legislation that then they, as private companies, they benefit from. So we look as well at policymakers who've been making policy. We look at the think tanks that are involved in NHS privatisation, consultants, advisors. We look at lobbyists, lobbyist databases, and try and link them up to the private companies that we see popping up and getting money from NHS contracts. We're looking at political donations. So we're kind of like mapping out who has influence and who has power and who's creating the legislation that we see then causing so much damage and harm to us all, to frontline staff, to patients. We have, there's loads of publicly available stuff. So you can find like publicly available contracts on like several sites online. Frameworks are really interesting to look at with the NHS privatisation. It's a specific kind of way, framework agreements, how procurement works. You can access NHS spends at local level, at trust level, but also NHS England level. I can't read the blue thing that I put there. Oh yeah, these are just some examples, but I'm not going to go into them for time's sake. Looking at the CVs of key players, so that would be NHS England executives, and that would be people in government, kind of looking at who's in control, looking at the revolving doors. I know this is loads, but like I said, this is usually like a weekend or a day long like thing that we go through. But yeah, so it's kind of trying to understand the map. How we're mapping is maybe something that some people have heard of before. Also loads of resources online about how to do this. But following the connections is really, really important for understanding what we're fighting against and how this kind of like ideological, the infrastructure works and how it's systemic. Can we jump to the next one? So I've never done this specific thing before, but I tried to do something that was a bit visual because, to be honest, most of my day is spent reading accounts and it's really boring and it's on the screen and it's all black and white. So I tried to do something quite visual. Something fun. I just picked one thing I could think of to try and give you a flavour of the kind of corporate research that we do, or the anti-capitalist research. So do people recognise these faces?
No.
Yeah, Jackie Rock. We've got Jackie Rock up here. What's her title?
Well, I think she's just stepped down, hasn't she? But she was this procurement that she was in charge of. But
Yeah.
I think she's just left.
Has she just left? Right, well then this is out of date. But I had up on the website online, NHS England executives, she's down as Chief Commercial Officer. So yeah, okay, she's just stepped down. Jackie Rock also spent 30 years before coming to the NHS in finance, in Barclays, JP Morgan, Citibank, different stuff like this. So starts giving you a flavour of where people are coming from, the people who are also like have positions of power in the NHS. Anyone else recognise any of the faces? No. So here we have Sir James Mackey. Yeah.
The guy at the top right looks quite menacing.
Yeah, yes, and that's the official picture online. Yeah, so that's Sir James Mackey. He is what's his official title? We've got him. He's the National Director of Elective Recovery, and I'm sure he.
Which is what?
Elective Recovery is a task force that was set up, and now it's kind of its own thing. And it was basically it's like a vehicle to fast track private companies, the private sector, into the NHS. One of many on this timeline.
So as in elective care.
It's called the Elective Recovery.
The electorate. Sorry,
No,
I see it from here.
When you
Sorry.
spoke at the ICB Northern Region as the chair of the recovery for RBI.
Yeah.
He's like involved as a chief exec now in the RBI.
Yeah. And then here we have, with the links to HSBC and the UK Border Agency, we've got Julian Kelly, whose title is Deputy Chief Executive and Chief Exec Financial Officer. So these are also, and this is just information from their bios online. This is stuff that they're happy to tell everybody about. A little bit further digging, often you see things that they don't want people to be knowing about. And over here we've got Emily Lawson. She's the Chief Operating Officer. She's had multiple private sector roles, including 14 years in McKinsey & Co before coming to the NHS. And I'm sure people know that McKinsey & Co is one of the big four, making millions, probably more across the years from the NHS, and involved in also creating legislation that then furthers privatisation. Here's the next one. Thanks. So, okay, then up here at the top, it's just like some of the kind of search terms that we use. We use specific ways of searching online to make it easier to find stuff. So we've got corporate power, and then we're looking for corporate power and scandal. And I just tried to find out something about 3 things here that some of those NHS England execs were involved in. So I want people to guess. So up here, we've got one of these, either McKinsey, Barclays, or the Elective Recovery Task Force worked with Purdue Pharma, the maker of OxyContin, to create and employ aggressive marketing and sales tactics to overcome doctors' reservations about the highly addictive drugs.
I think that was McKinsey, wasn't it?
Yeah, McKinsey, both McKinsey. Okay, we're going to hold that there, right? And then over here we've got who has launched with Circle Health Group, Spire Healthcare, Practice Plus Group, Independent Healthcare Provider Network, which is a lobby group for private healthcare, including Bupa and HCA.
Elective Recovery Task Force.
And then has funded the companies behind a controversial pipeline and aggressive oil expansion as part of their commitment to fighting climate change. Okay, do you want to jump to the next one? You were right. Yay. Well, yay, but okay. So I want to go on to obviously I know this is like jumping through it, but I think what we find really important for fighting this stuff with a Corporate Watch and our experiences is that this stuff is global. Capitalism is international, and capitalism is cross-sector. Yeah, there are no borders for capitalists, and these companies have their fingers in many, many pies. So we have to be international and cross-sector as well. It's only going to work if we're fighting at this stage against these big companies and the privatisation of our NHS and the other damage of these companies and their links to the state and party politics and everything it's doing. So alliances are really, really key. Alliances make us stronger. It paints the picture more clearly because these companies aren't just doing one thing. So example, there's tech companies in the NHS. No, I'll come on to that in a minute. We have Accenture, which has an office. I don't know if there's a photo up here, but they do have an office in Leeds. They're over there in that fancy building area. They're a tech company. Accenture also are, just so I'm not going to, they are involved in the border industry. So they have tech that's been currently used for virtual borders, which is deadly, as people know. And they have kind of worrying or worrying ties and worrying amounts of contracts coming from the NHS. So here's a Financial Times article talking about how much money was going to this one IT provider. And they have links to and partnered with companies like Leonardo, and I don't know if people have heard of them, but they're an arms company who are currently supplying arms to Israel that's been currently used on Palestinians in Gaza. So straight away, you've got a company with dodgy goings on in the NHS that we'd want to question, but you've also got like a list of allies and relationships cross-sector that straight away makes any campaign against Accenture stronger, more like clued in as well, because you're going to have each areas like working to their strengths, and they're going to understand their picture. So putting those pictures together and building those alliances and relationships is just makes sense, I think. So here we've got the ideas for alliances just from this, and this was a really quick put together. We've got PSC, or Example Palestine Solidarity Campaign, would be already campaigning around Accenture. We've got Divest Borders over here, which is a student group connected to People and Planet. So these are student campaigners looking at divestment in their universities around border industry. We've got the CWU here, and we've got the United Tech and Allied Workers. Recently, we had Taj Ali, who's a union head and kind of a researcher or whatever. He was talking about Accenture and how big tech is undermining workers' rights, I guess. So you've got like Google and Amazon sub-hiring on short-term contracts with no rights from companies like Accenture. So there we've got more alliances with workers, and then NHS, of course. And that was just one example of one company that I just like picked out. You could do this with every company. Can you go to the next one, please? So keeping that in mind, we're going back to these 4. These are the things they're involved with. And can you jump to the next one? And examples of alliances, just from some of the people who are involved in NHS England, you've got HSBC on a quick look at Violation Tracker UK. Has anyone used that before? It's, yeah, it's an amazing database that's been put together with a list of violations that private companies have committed and the amounts they've been fined for those penalties. So on Violation Tracker, HSBC since 2010 has been fined penalties of 362.5 million. And you can go and you can find details about that and stuff. So automatically you're bringing in workers' rights, you're bringing in stuff like that. UK Border Agency have linked it to Patients Not Passports. That's a Migrants Organised plus Medact campaign around getting the hostile environment out of the NHS. Barclays, I've just linked it to a Boycott Barclays campaign, which had recent successes where Palestine Solidarity activists through BDS have forced Barclays to divest from Elbit, an arms company. They're still continuing the fight because they're still investing in other stuff, but that stuff wins. And then you've got Global Justice Now, who are a health justice group who do a campaign at the moment around Big Pharma. So that was linking it to the Purdue Pharma and McKinsey Elective Recovery Task Force. Then we've got this is an image from Open Democracy. So you've just got like links to loads of other information, and there was that list of private health companies that were involved in that task force, which then gives you a whole area of other kind of campaigns and organizing to look into. Did you go to the and just to end, and sorry, it's been like really, really quick, but this is another example of potential relationship buildings or connections, alliances possibly for NHS privatisation campaigning. Does anybody recognise any? Well, the obvious one. Anyone else besides Tony? Yeah, it's a bit. So okay, so here we've got. So here we've got Larry Ellison. Does everybody know him?
Oracle.
Yeah, Oracle founder, big boss, owner. He's the he's one of the richest men in the world. I think a few weeks ago was the fourth richest. So they pop up and down with each other.
And he's just gone up from selection, I think.
Oh, of course,
one
yeah.
of the people as well. So
Yeah. They're buddies. So Oracle, his company, a data software company, has really big contracts in the NHS. They bought Cerner Health in 2021, which is their biggest ever acquisition of another company. So now, richest man in the world has a very big link to NHS data across England. Then you've got his data, or his software, sorry, Oracle software is also used for facial recognition technology, which is controversial and has been proven to be racially biased. So you've got this link here with End, Stop and Scan, which is a national campaign, but also has a Leeds collective working on this. So suddenly you've got an NHS focus, some contracts linking into other campaigns, which kind of widens out like just the strength of campaigning around this. Tony Blair is in here because, let me get this right, Larry Ellison funds the Tony Blair Institute. Yeah, a lot. They are buddies, these two. Watch out for these two. They also share like key staff members across the Tony Blair Institute and Oracle. So you've got LinkedIn there, and then we have, yeah, this picture is just trying to represent NHS data. And here you've got Larry Ellison is one of the biggest funders of the Israeli military in history, the biggest individual funder himself. So he funds quite a lot. They've also been over to Israel, the CEO, Zafar Katz, in the last few months, just like giving more support and promising extra data centers, which might not happen. But anyway, there we go. We painted the picture. So funding, this is a picture of Gaza at the moment. And then we've got No Tech for Tyrants, which is, has anybody heard of that group? They're an amazing group that we've been working with this year. that do, they're international, but they have a group in Oxford, I think around the country as well, but strong group in Oxford. They do research within students, within unis and kind of academic spaces around big tech, the oppressive uses of big tech. So we've linked in with them because Oracle is one of the companies that they were looking at, and we've been sharing information backwards and forwards between kind of things that you maybe would think aren't connected, like NHS campaigning and this No Tech for Tyrants group. And so we've been able to strengthen each other's campaigns around this, just sharing information from different areas of organising. And that is Whistle Stop Tour. If anybody wants any information on like the resource and stuff, like totally ask me afterwards. I'm happy to do that. Thanks.
Anybody questions from Colin?
We know. Thanks. Thanks for that, as you say, a real whistle stop tour. But have you got any handle? We know, we've got an idea how much of NHS resources goes out on clinical care provided from private companies. Very little idea of how much goes on the behind the scenes, the commissioning of healthcare, the involvement of, say, the big four accountancy firms in the policy making, and to my mind, that's probably where the big money goes, and is presumably part of the overall NHS budget that we keep being told about. Do you know roughly what proportion goes on those back office?
No idea, except that I totally would agree that it's probably massive, and it would be really interesting to know. And this is kind of, I guess what we do is not try to have, like, I'm not an expert on this at all, but it's just trying to share the tools, because we can all do this ourselves. There's very, very little tools that we use that you can't all access. I think there's one or two databases that are quite extensive, but actually if you know any students, they get access to that through their uni libraries. So it's all out there. We can all do this research ourselves. There's also, I feel like I have read other people who've been doing like investigations or reports on that exact thing. So maybe a quick search online would pop that up, and then you'd see where the gaps are, and maybe then you could go and figure out how you or a group of people would fill in the gaps using all of the resources that you can.
Yeah, it's just a question. I mean, I'm a school teacher, and one of the scams with PFI is there are, I think, 900 PFI schools, and something that's been unearthed recently is when they've been increasing the price of contracts and services, they've subjected head teachers to a non-disclosure agreement, which means nobody's allowed to know how much it costs. So when we're trying to work out how much will our PFI hospital cost, they actually seem to be using this strong arm bullying technique, and I'm wondering, how do we get around it? I mean, I think it's estimated £400 million potentially for schools that we're paying just through PFI, but we never really know because we're not allowed to know, and their teachers are threatened if they try and tell the public. I know I work in a school which I think has probably got a hefty sum every year, pays in rent just for a piece of land, and the land is tiny, but they're paying loads of money, and yet schools are facing cuts, increasing class sizes, and this is the same sort of stuff in hospitals, and I'm wondering, what is the PFI bill at the moment?
Yeah, that's a good question. I found on Leeds teaching hospitals, I had a look at their spend that's available online. They have to publish like legally a spend over a certain amount, and I did find how much was paid out monthly for PFI and for that, but that's specific. So there might be ways of finding it, but also then you can do freedom of information requests. I'm not an expert on those either, but I have done a few, and that might be something where if there's non-disclosure agreements, then
We can't tell you.
yeah, but yeah, it would be just fight them on it, keep going backwards and forwards, or get someone on the inside, get your whistleblower. Yeah, it's hard. It does take like figuring it out and doing one thing and getting pushed back and told no, and then you reword it and you do it again, or yeah. No simple answer to that one.
Okay, Mike's got a very quick question.
And then there's Gwen over here.
Okay.
Gwen.
So Mike, and then Glenn, and then we move on.
Yeah, thanks for that amazing survey. I was really interested when you mentioned about that this is international and alliances are key. And I just finished a series of joining 4 webinars from India. And the issues were globalization, financialization, commodification, all in relation to health. And it's a small group, but really, like you, the reason I wanted to ask the question is, I wonder if you have any connection with that group, and if so, would you like to have?
Yes, please. Yeah, I don't, and that would be great, yeah.
And we'll certainly circulate details of your work.
Yeah.
Tools. Gwen.
Yeah, I think the public could do to know just how much PFI means to a hospital or a school, because that 12.1 billion, you know, the repayments now are over 80 billion and are never going to be paid in some situations. So I mean, you think of that massive amount that is paid out year after year with nothing, no direct benefits at all. You know? And also, I think that the public are often hoodwinked into thinking that because the NHS logo has been kidnapped, if you like, and is used by these companies, they think they are getting NHS care. They're getting care, but if anything goes wrong with that care, it's right back to the NHS. And the NHS took over 11,000 people back into the NHS last year because of private care mistakes and errors and things that they couldn't cope with, because they are cherry pickers. They will only pick the things that are straightforward, that are profitable. It really is profit over people all the time. And that's why we must rail against it all the time. They're just bleeding it dry. Thank you.
Agree. There you go.
Thanks very much, Amber. Really important talk. And I think a strong challenge for us to link up with other campaigners, and really important to build networks. Now we have Louise Irvine as our next speaker, speaking remotely. Louise is a GP. She was also chair of the successful Save Lewisham Hospital campaign and stood against Jeremy Hunt some time ago in the election. And Louise is a member of the COMP executive. She would have liked to have been with us in person today, but for family reasons couldn't do that. But Louise, if you can hear us, I think Nick's just about to get you up on the screen.
Do you want to try speaking?
We can see you. Yeah, say something to us.
You're muted, I think.
Are you muted, Louise? Because we can see your lips moving.
I think it's something in the chat. Maybe she said something in there about.
With me. Sorry about this.
We do have a video of Louise for backup, but it would be nice to.
Yeah, that's the video.
Well, it's not letting me on.
Got you. I'm trying.
Yeah,
We can hear
that's
you.
it, great. No, thank you. Thanks very much. Thank you, John. And it's lovely to kind of be here, even though I can't be with you in person. I wish I could, because it looks like a really fantastic afternoon. So you're just going to have to hear me remotely, and I'm going to read out my talk, because it's got lots of facts and figures in it, which I won't be able to remember. So I need to read it. Okay, over to my page. Can everyone hear me okay, Han?
Yeah.
Yeah, brilliant. Okay, then here goes. So, good afternoon. I've been asked to talk about how campaigners can tackle the problems with general practice. As John said, my name is Louise Irvin, and I'm a GP on the verge of retirement, having been a GP for nearly 40 years. I can't quite believe it. I've worked in the same practice in inner city London for about 30 of those. I'm a member of the Comp Executive and, as John said, was also chair of the Save Lewisham Hospital campaign. I will say straight off that campaigning to save one's local hospital is very different and possibly easier than campaigning to save general practice for all sorts of reasons. But campaign we must, as general practice is in deep crisis. Let's think first about why general practice is worth saving. General practice is an integral and critical part of the NHS. General practice is the main component of primary care, the first line of contact for most people seeking healthcare. It provides community-based care from cradle to grave, covering everything from acute illness to prevention to long-term conditions and much of mental health care. But general practice is much more than just GPs. GPs are part of a wider team of health professionals providing essential care, such as practice nurses, nurse practitioners, and pharmacists. Over 90% of healthcare contacts take place in primary care. Every working day, more than 1 million people attend an appointment at their local GP surgery. 4 in 10 appointments are same-day access. 2/3 are delivered face-to-face. General practice is managing to deliver 5 million more appointments every month than it did pre-pandemic. And I think we should just take a moment to pause. Over 1 million consultations in general practice every working day. But this amazing service, whose staff have admirably risen to the challenge of increasing the provision of care despite massive difficulties, is in crisis, and the implications for patient care, for the NHS, and the health of the nation are devastating. Poor access to general practice has a range of negative impacts, including unmet care needs, avoidable harm, for example, via delayed diagnoses or referrals, and inappropriate use of other NHS services. What are the signs of the crisis? The 2023 GP Patient Survey, an annual survey sent to more than 2 million adults across England, tells a story of increasing patient dissatisfaction with the care they receive in general practice. Most patients, 72.4%, rated their overall experience of their GP practice as good, with just over 1 in 3 rating their experience as very good. But compared to 2021, the proportion of patients who rated their experience as good has decreased by over 10 percentage points from 83%. The survey finds that just over half, 54.4%, reported a good overall experience of making an appointment, the lowest level in the 6 years the question has been asked. In addition, the profession is demoralised. GPs are leaving almost as fast as they can be recruited. In the last 5 years, the average number of patients per full-time qualified GP has risen to 2,300. When I first started out in general practice, it was more like 1,800, 1,900 patients per GP. This level of one GP for 2,300 patients is unsafe for patients and unmanageable and extremely stressful for the GP. The NHS in England has the equivalent of 1,557 fewer full-time, fully qualified GPs than in September 2015, despite the demand for care increasing, with 6.4 million more patients registered with a GP practice, and patients' health needs becoming more complex, with increasing numbers of patients with long-term conditions, such as diabetes, and a major shift of the work of managing these long-term conditions from hospitals into general practice without any concomitant shift of resources. General practice has tried to respond to that increased demand. GP staff delivered 356 million appointments in 2023, which is 14% more than in 2019. It's incredible. There's been so much talk about how general practice is failing, but when you see the the huge efforts that have been made in general practice to meet the growing demand, it's really heartbreaking. The gap between demand and capacity leaves GPs working harder and their staff working harder and facing more burnout as patients find it harder than ever to see them. Since 2015, over 1,000 NHS GP practices have closed. Many have given up their contracts because they were not able to recruit enough GPs to continue to provide a decent service. Despite increases in the number of people entering general practice training, the number of fully qualified GPs continues to decline. The proportion of newly qualified GPs taking up roles in general practice within a year of completing their training has dropped from 48% to 38%. Why? Why has this happened to a once well-regarded, popular and effective service? The main cause of this is underfunding. The NHS itself has been underfunded since 2010, and general practice has suffered disproportionately. The percentage of the NHS budget that goes to general practice is 8.4% for 2023-24. This is the lowest share of funding for primary care in 8 years and means that the growth in primary care spend has fallen below inflation. And I remember at its peak, general practice was receiving about 10% of total NHS spend at a time when the total NHS spend itself was also relatively higher. But it's not just underfunding. Successive governments have undermined the very foundations of general practice, as revealed in the decline of continuity of care in general practice. Since 2004, the majority of GPs have not had individual lists of patients. The government and NHS leaders have not paid sufficient attention to continuity of care or prioritised it effectively in national policy, which has hastened its decline, even though there's clear international and UK research showing that seeing the same GP regularly leads to fewer hospital visits, lower mortality, and less cost for the NHS. We see this in the results. We see the evidence of this decline in continuity care in the results of the annual GP patient survey. Of those who have a preferred healthcare professional at their practice, 2 in 5 say they get to see them almost or always, or almost always, or a lot of the time. And this is a drop from 3 in 5 seeing their regular doctor most of the time in 2015. The attempts to fix the GP crisis by creating additional roles within general practice, such as pharmacists, social prescribers, physicians associates, has not made a meaningful impact on the sustainability of general practice. Some of these roles are very valuable, but as additions to the team, not as substitutes for GPs, which is what they were being used for. And despite the Chancellor announcing a £22.6 billion increase in £22.6 billion increase in day-to-day spending for the NHS over 2 years, GPs are likely to be one of the parts of the NHS worse off as a result of the budget, especially as they will have to pay the full cost of increased national insurance for their staff, something the rest of the NHS has been protected from. Another ill-thought-out, ineffective and damaging attempt to fix general practice has been to open up provision of GP services to the corporate private sector. This began after the last Labour government changed the terms of the GP contract to enable this, and has been continued as policy by successive Tory governments. These corporate-run practices provide even less continuity of care, are generally less popular with patients, and often provide worse care than traditional models of general practice. I was part of the campaign to try to prevent the takeover of Centene Corporation of dozens of GP practices in London. What can campaigners do? At a fundamental level, the challenge is to both fix the crisis and rebuild primary care. We need a model that works well for patients and communities, based on continuity of care within locally available primary care services, with general practice at its heart. I think campaigners should defend the traditional model of general practice against corporate takeover, while at the same time we can explore different models of care that may work better than the partnership model in some areas. But don't let anyone kid you that it is the independent contractor model that is the problem, or that it doesn't matter if your local practice is taken over by Centene Corporation or a hedge fund. We need to campaign for increased funding of general practice and increased training, recruitment and retention of GPs and nurses. The Royal College of General Practitioners and the British Medical Association have called for the general practice budget to be restored to 11% of total health spend. These funds should be targeted to disadvantaged and underserved areas who have also suffered disproportionately through the funding crisis. The funding for GPs that had been diverted to the non-doctor and non-nurse additional roles, such as physicians associates, should be shifted to practice core funding so they can be used to employ more nurses and doctors. So the focus of campaigners should be for funding to train and employ more GPs and nurses, and policy changes that will promote continuity of care, such as capping patient list sizes and reintroducing personal lists. This will improve access, outcomes and efficiency, as well as being very popular with patients. It will also facilitate retention by making the job of the GP manageable in terms of workload and satisfying and rewarding once again. And as you know, reflecting back on my 40 years as a GP, I know that the most rewarding part of the job, and I also trained GP trainees for 15 years, and it was being part of a community, knowing your patients, knowing their families, and being able to provide continuity made it a really satisfying job. And it's not just about what made a satisfying job for someone like me. It was patients loved it and they valued it. But also, as I said, all the evidence shows it's effective. It's better medicine. So there's a lot at stake. But if we focus on these three things: increased funding, increased numbers of GPs and nurses, and defence of the model of care that provides comprehensive, community-based continuity of care, and that means opposing the corporate takeover of general practice, then we will be most effective in our campaigning to both defend and improve general practice. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Louise. That was great. I'll ask if there's any questions. We are running a bit late, so maybe a couple of questions if there are any. Anyone has a question for Louise? Zach.
Hi, thanks. That was really interesting. A good amount of facts, and hopefully I can find some to read them somewhere. In terms of how the Royal College of GPs voted recently on phasing out PAs, do you have any thoughts on what might be a good way to use those PAs, or for them to retrain? What do you think would be a good way for them to be used in the NHS in the future, or general practice in a different way?
Yeah, I mean, in the practice where I've been working, they did have PAs for a while, but then they stopped having PAs because they really didn't feel that they had the time to provide the supervision that PAs needed. They do need a lot of, to be safe for patients, a lot of supervision. There's no reason in principle why you can't have extended roles like physicians associates, but you need to have a really clear scope of practice. What is it that it's safe for them to do? And what level of training and supervision do they need? At the moment, there's no clarity at all on scope of practice. And what was happening is that PAs were actually just working as if they were GPs, and the patient just thought they were a GP. And, you know, although superficially it does sometimes look quite easy to be a GP, friends of mine say all you deal with is sore throats and backache. That's not actually true. It's quite complex. You're seeing a lot of undifferentiated problems. So somebody can come in with, I don't know, something like abdominal pain, and that could be something from something very, very minor or very common, or out to something potentially quite serious. And it's not always clear cut when they first present what's going on. So that's partly why GP training is quite long. It's not as long as consultant training, but it is, you know, you have your 5 years as a medical student, 5 or 6 years, depending on the course, then 2 years as a foundation doctor, and then 3 years as a GP registrar. And even that, when I was teaching registrars, they had loads of supervision. We especially at the beginning, we got them to feedback about every case they saw, and we reviewed their cases at the end of their surgeries. And we had a weekly half-day tutorial where we went over the cases they saw, and that was to ensure that they were learning, but also to ensure that they were being safe. And that sort of level of supervision for quite experienced doctors who were training in general practice was funded because it took up a lot of the GP's time. So now you had physicians associates. There was no funding for the time to supervise them. They had far less experience and training than say a GP trainee, and they were seeing undifferentiated patients. So sorry, I could go on, but there's a safety issue. I think when we get that right, I think it's possible that you could have somebody with a physician's associate role, but I personally am not sure what it would really entail.
Thank you, Louise. Okay, there's lots of questions. Sylvia, I think, was first, had a hand up first.
Sorry, Sylvia, just losing around. Sorry.
Hello, thank you for your excellent presentation. I wanted to ask about the impact of one little bit of privatisation is GPs having to charge, I think it's £15 for letters, and whether you've got any observations about that. I'm particularly concerned about people trying to get continuing healthcare funding. And you're saying that the boundary between yourselves and primary care is good. In Leeds, I found a great deal of difficulty in getting primary care nurses or matrons to be involved and to do continuing healthcare assessments.
Well, I don't really know. I personally, as a GP, wrote loads of letters for patients and didn't charge them. But the reality is that GPs are funded to provide core NHS services, and all those letters are outside core NHS, and actually they amount to hours and hours and hours of work a week, because whether it's housing letters, whether it's to do with benefits, whether it's to do with other things like wanting to get a letter because you haven't been able to pay your gym membership because you were ill. There's loads, and there's just a massive amount of workload that's unfunded. And GPs have actually said, I think quite rightly, we can't do that. Why shouldn't we be funded for the work we're doing? Because it's work, and you're sitting there and you're taking up time, and that you might be working till 8 o'clock at night writing all these things. So on principle, I don't think there's anything wrong with charging. I think if part of continuing healthcare is that it is required that you have a GP letter, then I think part of that, that's part, if it's seen as part of an NHS service, then it should be funded. What practices normally do now is give people a printout of their medical records, which they don't charge for, and which actually contains all the information that's necessary for these things. But and I don't want to go on about this because I can see I know it's contentious, but if you just think there's a massive volume of everybody says go to your GP and get a letter, basically, and it's hundreds of hours of work a week for a practice.
Thanks, Louise. One last question from Greg.
Yeah. Hi, Louise. What I want to know is, what is the government's current thinking about this? Because the great expansion of medical associate professionals is in the NHS workforce plan. I've not heard anything about the government distancing themselves from it. Darcy doesn't make any reference to physician associates at all. So my assumption in the absence of that is that the government intends to go ahead with the plan as it is, and therefore will expand the physician associates and the other MAPs greatly. What evidence is there that they might be rethinking this, and how are the Royal College and the BMA going to take that argument to them? Thanks.
I don't know if they're rethinking. You probably know more than I do, Greg, about it, because I know you don't.
I don't know anything.
I don't know either. I know that the BMA is against physicians associates, and I know that Royal College of General Practitioners has also come out against it, although I think they might have said something like, if the scope of practice can be defined, they may consider it, but that would be a very limited scope of practice. Basically, both the RCGP and the BMA have belatedly, I think, come to the conclusion that physicians' associates were being used as a replacement for general practitioners, which is what we've been saying all along. And I think the profession is really, the medical profession is really worried about this, and have mounted a massive campaign against it. It's the only time I've seen the BMA kind of, apart from the pay disputes, it's the only other time I've seen the BMA getting really, really active on some things. So if they have any influence at all, they might be able to change the policy. But I think that the government, I don't think the government listens to us really, or we have to force them to listen to us. Sorry, not a very good answer, but I actually don't have a clue what they're thinking.
Okay, thanks very much, Louise. We've had a great big picture of you projected on the wall of the conference room, so it's been almost better than having you here in person. Having you here in person would have been better, but thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much. Thanks. Bye.
So I'm the last speaker, and I'll try and make up some time by compressing what I was going to say, perhaps helped by the fact that I left my notes at home. We would like to have a group picture, and I think the best time to do that will be at the end of my talk, before everyone gets their tea. So I want to hand over to Neil at that point, because he'll tell us all exactly what we need to do. And many of us would have been on the Palestine March. I think we all recognize the destruction that's going on in Palestine and the targeting of hospital facilities and healthcare personnel. So we want to reference that in the photograph as well. So I'm just going to say something about where we seem to be at the present time in terms of the Labour government. Now, they made quite a lot of promises in the manifesto. They were vague, it must be said, but there was a promise to rebuild and restore the NHS once again. But there wasn't a lot of detail. Some things were set out. So for 40,000 more appointments a week to tackle the huge waiting list, which is now 7.6 million. I saw that Starmer wrongly quoted this as 6 million in a newspaper article earlier in the week. You have to put that in context. It sounds a lot, but in hospitals, there are 275,000 appointments every day. So an extra 40,000 a week, 8,000 a day, is just under 2% increase. This is not by any stretch of the imagination going to solve the waiting list. There was some commitment to increase funding for equipment. Well, that's fine, but Darcy has said there's a 37 billion shortfall in capital needed to upgrade buildings and equipment, and in the budget we've had 3 billion offered over 2 years, and this is really a very small amount. So the elephant in the room, I think, is funding, because Labour is putting a lot of emphasis on reform without defining what reform is over funding. I mean, my definition of reform, when I get asked about it in interviews, is to say, well, actually, it's useful improvement. And that's what the NHS is doing all the time. That's part of, your job as a professional in the NHS, is to constantly improve and reform the service. So there's nothing new about reform. What we need to hear is detailed plans of how they're actually going to make things better for patients. And if I just come back to the budget for a moment, Louise mentioned the headline figure, I think 22.6 billion, again over 2 years, but no money now, just at the moment when we're going into a winter crisis. And where we've actually got 14,000 patients, it's thought, are dying each year because of delays in finding them a bed once they're assessed in A&E and are needing admission. In other words, there's a real crisis going on in the NHS, and this is something which Rian talked about as well, but no immediate money. if you think that the maintenance backlog budget is 13.6 billion, in other words, if hospitals were to bring up, not just hospitals, but primary care facilities as well, if they were able to bring up their facilities to a decent standard, then they would need 13.6 billion. So, you know, 1 billion, which is being offered over 2 years, again, is very little. The infirmary here, on the BBC website, it says that the maintenance backlog for Leeds Infirmary is now, I think, 189 million. Although I noticed in one of the reports to the Trust Board recently, it actually said 600 million, which is even more eye-watering. The BMA on its website, it has an interesting graph, constantly updated, but it says, let's look at the historic funding of the NHS since it was set up to 2010. And if you draw a line through the funding increases, it's more or less a straight line. If you carry on that straight line, the question is, how much more money would the NHS have received if it had continued to have the usual 4% annual uplift? And it was 446 billion when last I looked, which was a few days ago. Now, most sensible people, those working in the NHS, patients, I think, and certainly health policy think tanks, all agree that more funding is crucial. And this is something which has been denied by Labour. They do say, well, we sorted out the NHS before. And there's no question that under the Blair government, waiting lists were brought down and public satisfaction increased. But actually they increased funding very considerably from about just under 4% to nearly 7% year by year. And this was a conscious move to increase funding of the NHS more in line with average European funding. And so the lessons that one can learn from those years is not that the marketisation and privatisation initiatives actually worked, but that the increased funding, the investment in facilities, equipment, and importantly in staff, those are the things which actually improved the service. But we're not hearing that from Labour at the moment. I do have problems with saying the NHS is broken. I know on one level it reflects the experience of staff and some patients, but there are still 1.3 million interactions between NHS and patients every day. Some people are getting good services. The thing which worries me about using the word broken is that these days, if something breaks, you don't normally fix it. You throw it away and get something else. You know, if your television is broken, there's no way you can take it to be fixed. And I think that that's the worry, that this is code for we need a change in system. And it's interesting that Patricia Hewitt, who I think was a mentor, maybe still is a mentor for Wes Streeting, when Streeting said the NHS is broken, she immediately came out and says, yes, but what he needs is, what he means is, it needs a new funding model. Well, of course, that's the last thing that it needs. Now, Labour have made, I mean, they say they've got a plan, but they certainly don't have a detailed plan. Maybe they'll have more of a plan when they've had the 10-year review. But their plan boils down to the 3 shifts, which is moving care from hospitals into the community, employing new technology, and what's the other one? Oh, so it's prevention. So prevention, care in the community, and technology. There's nothing new about that. It figures very prominently, for example, in Simon Stevens' 5-year forward view, and it goes back in other health documents. They're, in a sense, obvious things to do, but they don't readily solve all the problems of the NHS. And using new technology is often expensive. Care in the community, fine, but you have to invest in it. You can't suddenly change over from hospital care to community care. And when they're talking about prevention, I think they should be talking much more about the social determinants of health. You know, poverty, poor housing, poor environments, poor food, low pay, poor jobs. these are the things, if you improve those, you would improve health much more than the NHS can do. And yet you when they talk about prevention, they seem to be talking about things like giving the slimming drugs to obese unemployed people in order to get them back to work. You think that's a wonderful thing to do, whereas it's completely ignoring the root causes of obesity, the social determinants of ill health. And they really need to have a cross-departmental strategy for reducing health inequalities. And I don't see much signs of that, as well as improving public health, of course, with its massive 40% cut in funding over recent years. Now, we know that Wes Streeting doesn't want to meet with Comp. He keeps his distance from the trade unions and from health campaigners. We haven't been able to get a meeting with him. He's not interested in what we think. But he is very interested in hearing from the people who were key players in the Blair era. So we now have Alan Milburn brought back in the Department of Health, apparently going to have a very influential role. The semi-independent status of NHS England is also being modified so that he'll have more direct control over that. They've brought back James Corrigan into the Department of Health. This is a guy who had some left-wing pretensions years ago, but who much more recently said that failing hospitals should be taken over by private companies, and complained that the Lansley reforms were nowhere near as far-reaching as they should be. So these are the people that they're talking to. And then very worryingly, I think, just to finish up, the question now is whether they're planning a kind of massive PFI Mark II. And I saw pictures of Angela Rayner and the guy from BlackRock, whose name I can't remember. Who's it? Runs BlackRock. Larry Stevenson. This is a massive asset management fund, and basically they're in conversation with BlackRock about could they not build public infrastructure, including in the health services. And BlackRock is saying, yeah, we'd quite like to do that, but you would have to guarantee it was risk-free for us, send us loads of patients, have long-term contracts that you couldn't get out of. So they're looking at really, I think, privatizing many aspects of public life. And this is really very far from the direction that we want to go in. And we do remember, we have to think back to 48, when the Labour government was very bold, despite the economy being in an extremely parlous state, debt being high. They realised that if you wanted to have a strong economy, then you needed to have a strong health service. We're now hearing it the other way around, that you can't have a strong health service until you have a strong economy. But we're also seeing 2.8 million people out of work because they've got chronic ill health. And it's becoming clear that the state of the NHS is actually impacting on the economy. So this needs to really be a complete change in perspective from Labour. They are not being bold. What is boldness to Rachel Reeves? It's avoiding taxing the very rich. It's avoiding taxing super profits on these big fossil fuel companies and others. And it's cutting fuel allowance from pensioners, not getting rid of the 2-child benefit cap, and doing something very simple about addressing child poverty. So it's the opposite of boldness. And in many ways, that's extremely disappointing, if not altogether unexpected. So the real question for campaigners and all of us here, and the question posed by this meeting, is how do we campaign in this situation? How can we be more effective at local level? Amber's given us some suggestions, which I think are very important. That's doing background research, but also finding others to link up with. And that's a theme perhaps we could develop. But that's where I'll leave it. I'll hand over to Neil, who's very good at telling you what to do. Please listen to him, because that way we get a very good picture out of this. Okay, thank you.
Before Neil for a second, we thought we'd reconvene about 3:45, give people time to get a cup of tea and us to take a photograph. And and we'll finish at 4:45. And then, as John said, if somebody will lead anyone down who would like to just stop for half an hour down at the pub, which is quite nearby. But we're going to assemble over there. Neil will direct us, but I've got some comp flags and some Gaza flags. Obviously, if you don't want to be on there with the Gaza flag, I think we'll do that first. But I'm hoping most people will, and the banner. We're going to assemble at the back, facing Neil, I think. Oh, do you want to be with the banner in? No, you're all right now. Eh? You'll do what Neil tells us, but can I just get some kit? Thank you.
We've got the placards around the walls, please. And also apparently, grab that as well.
I've got another one.
Okay.
Well, suddenly you realise that the banner in case people on the demo want
That's a lovely screensaver, Nicola. Here. Sorry, we're all on lovely countryside. That's just the default one actually on the thing.
You're great, and thank you very much for cooperating with Neil on the picture. It should be a nice picture. So now, as I said, it's really time, I think, to reflect on some of the things which the speakers have said. And we would really like to have some discussion about campaigning. You know, what do we do? Is there anything more that we can do than the street stalls and the occasional demonstrations? We think a national demonstration is worth considering, for example, but mainly local activities, I think. And obviously people might want to comment on things that were said or make contributions along the lines of what their concerns are about the NHS and current direction of travel. So it's a kind of open house, really. So if you would like to speak, then put your hand up. And Amber did mention violation tracker, which is a useful tool. Greg knows a lot about that. He's sitting over there and wrote an article which is on the KOMP website. But might like to say something about that. I don't know, Greg, whether you'd like to say anything to encourage people to look at violation tracker.
I can do. There's other things I'd like to say.
Yes, but it's not. That's just my suggestion. But yes, would you like to start off with other things then?
Okay, yeah, please. Thanks. All right. To keep this within reasonable bounds, I won't talk about Alan Milburn, except to say that today the government announced that he is now going to be the lead non-executive at the Department of Health and Social Care. And as part of that role, he will chair the board of the DHSC. Now, it had already come out that the government was going to shift the balance of power between the Department of Health and Social Care and NHS England. So whereas NHS England has kind of been in the driving seat for some time now, it's going to go back to the Department of Health, and the role of NHS England will be to implement strategic decisions that are taken at the DHSC, of which Alan Milburn is now the chair. So what I'd like to suggest that people might do is, if you look on the KOMP website, there is a long article about Alan Milburn, which I wrote, and it is partly about his role during the Blair government, but it is also equally about what he has been doing since then, which I think is more relevant. and this was with PwC, and I just asked you to go and read it. I understood that what we wanted to talk about now was what are the options for campaigning. And I just want to say one very specific thing. I think that the discussion today has made clear that Labour is not delivering what we are trying to do. I don't think that message comes through clearly enough in the Health Campaigns Together bulletins, and I think it needs to. What the current HCT bulletin does is it has some very useful information about current industrial disputes, some of which are against privatization, and that's all very valuable. On the kind of general political thing, it does talk, and I know John will have written this, it talks about how the budget is not going to deliver what is actually needed to rescue the NHS from its financial crisis. But what it doesn't do is to set out what Labour's actual agenda is, which we are all pretty well agreed on. It's not simply the discussion that we've had today. KLNP has produced a lot of material on what Labour's agenda is and what the different players in this are actually doing now. And I think that needs to come through really clearly in Health Campaigns Together, which I don't think up to now it has done. Why does this matter? Because this is the vehicle through which we can communicate with health workers and health unions. Why does that matter? Because in my opinion, that is the only force that is capable of putting a stop to this. So we have to think strategically. We're not going to get here by lobbying Labour, but we could get here if unions became well aware of what the agenda of the government is and resolved to stop it, which they could, even now. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Greg. Yeah, I'm looking forward to the points I think you made there. And if you want to find Greg's article, which is well worth reading, on the COMP website, you click on campaigns, and then there's a box that opens called Labour and the NHS, and there's a number of articles in there, one of which is the one on Alan Milburn's. Okay, any other suggestions?
I don't think I need a microphone. Usually I don't, anyway. I'm very concerned about the possibility of another trade bill being brought forward by Trump, and what's left of our social services and the NHS being the collateral, which is what Trump put on the table before. That's one of my concerns. So perhaps need to be forward looking. It hasn't happened now, but perhaps need to decide how we will react to that, because I'm pretty sure it will happen, because it's a way of making money and it's a way of placating Trump, possibly, with the bad relationships that have already been set up. I don't know what anyone else thinks about that.
I agree with you.
Yeah, just a thought.
Good thought. I think we probably all agree.
Yes, they've said that they, Gwen Vardigans from York. They've said that they won't have the NHS in any trade deals, but I don't believe them. I think that when this raised its head a couple of years ago or more, we had free trade zones outside the hospitals. I think we need those again. I think we need to expose it for what it is, because it's still going on. You know, the fact that you can be sued if your contract goes through and they're not satisfied, it can be sued. You can be sued for just about all you've got, because this happens in a lot of the Latin American companies, and Latin American countries, I should say. And I would also like to expose PFI, and I think those sort of things can be in the campaign newsletter. And also what's going on, it could follow on with, you know, if this happens, this is what we want to do. You know. Sorry.
Thanks, Gwen. And Reinhardt.
Yeah, as I said, Reinhardt, I used to work at the University in Public Health. I think it's important to send out or give some positive messages what one wants to achieve. And for me, one important message would be to have citizens' assembly in the NHS at the national and local level to improve governance and transparency, so that it is not left to sort of administrators and, as we see, come into these positions in dubious ways, and sort of once in a lifetime or once every 4 or 5 years voting a government in, but there should be a permanent, in my opinion, citizens' assembly at the local and national level. And the other thing is the funding of NHS. And I think there should be clear messages. Where can the funding come from? UK controls several tax havens, important tax havens in the world. And obviously, neither Labour nor Conservatives dare to touch them. So that is something one should raise, and how much money is stored away there. Similar, I agree with the social determinants of health, but what to do about it? And in my opinion, one way is also to tax these sort of negative effects of social determinants of health. So if private property, like in London, is one of the richest places in the world, there's a lot of private property, it cannot run away, it could be taxed at a very high level, and that could raise a lot of funds. And similar, I mean, there are many more ideas like that, so I think we need to get out some positive messages in order to say how the NHS can be funded and how it should be governed. Thank you.
Thank you, Reinhard. Yeah, they're useful points as well, I think. I mean, one of my pictures is of the pharmacy and the outpatient pharmacy at the infirmary. You can see it's a Boots pharmacy, and of course, Boots relocated to Switzerland. They make massive profits out of the NHS, but pay very little in tax. So that's an example of what you're raising. We used to have a leaflet called Boots Loots, which Mark designed. I used to, Nick and Mark. I used to delight in sticking up outside the Boots pharmacy until they took their leaflet holder away.
I have a quick word whilst people are just thinking. One of the things I found quite powerful was that stuff we all heard about, taking a lot of the eye operations, the cataract operations, out of the NHS, now become routine. The massive growth in the whole sector around eyes, and of course it's hearing and everything else. And I think people see that as perhaps the way we're going to end up with a two-tier NHS, which is what this is all about. We don't want to allow NHS to become a service for poor people, and everybody else slowly goes away. But I think what I took out of that was the way that it denudes the ophthalmology departments. And this is perhaps picking up on Greg, what you're talking to other NHS workers. It doesn't just outsource, but because the trainees then are not getting the experience on those simple operations, and because the consultants are then more enticed to go into these private sector, in fact, it starts to totally shrink the NHS and the NHS capacity and the skill and experience there. So I think it's worth us perhaps making a bit more of that this is hollowing out of the NHS, not just kind of making it into just a rump service for the poor.
Following on.
An ophthalmologist.
Yeah.
I didn't realise who I was the next to.
Having worked 40 years as an eye surgeon, I mean, I can concur with what when it's been saying. The other side of it is that there's a limited amount of funding that's put aside for ophthalmology care, and the more that is sucked out into dealing with cataract, which anyone over the age of 50 is going to have a degree of cataract, doesn't mean you need a cataract operation. You only need it if it's reducing your vision to a level that's stopping you from doing the things that you want to do. But people are being directed directly from their optometrists when they go for an eye check. They're told, oh, you've got some cataract, I'll refer you on to one of these cataract factories. So a lot of operations are being done on people who don't really need them, and that is sucking money away from everything that isn't a cataract. For the children whose visual development is being impaired by various things, from people who get a broken bottle in their face in the middle of the night, or various other things. So that is being sacrificed on the altar of private companies making as much profit as they can from treating things that don't necessarily need to be treated. And as soon as you bring profits into the consideration, people will sell the product that they do and that they would like to continue to do. And so we'll be seeing this moving into a lot of other areas, and thinking particularly of neurology consultations, where there's a very long waiting list in many parts of the country for neurology. As from this said, also Gilda's also mentioned about audiology, hearing aid assessments. It's sucking people into these private companies, and Specsavers have very powerful lobbying forces within the very close to the centre of the Department of Health. Well.
Thanks, Colin. So one of the things which we should call for, but will doubtless fall on deaf ears, is that policies are evidence-based, because if you look at this strategy of outsourcing to the private sector, they only take the profitable, low-risk cases, and it does have a negative impact on the NHS. And my sister recently had a cataract removal, and she told me that she was going to have a cataract removal. I said, well, is it causing you any problems? And she said, no, I didn't know I had it until I hit the optician. She's now had it done. Now, there's a picture of one of the GP surgeries where New Medica, I think it's the second largest provider of cataract surgery to the NHS, is located in Leeds. And I was sent a recording of the boss of New Medica speaking to a private healthcare conference recently, where he was saying, look, you know, I set this up from nothing, now it has 100 million turnover. Now I've set up a multi-provider specialty business. And if you ask me what the future of the NHS is going to look like, it's not going to be the NHS sending a few patients to the private sector. It will be private providers providing all the services, and the NHS will just be the mechanism for funneling public money, to the private sector. Yeah, there were quite a few other hands up, I think.
Is this working? Yeah, sorry. It's just to go back, I think, because we've got a Yorkshire campaign meeting today, one of the things I would like to see is how we could coordinate ourselves, because we've all got different links with different campaigning groups, different trade unions, and a lot of us know other people who could get involved. But the campaign I'm thinking about is, it goes back to what I mentioned earlier and Gwen has said, the PFI contracts are going to be coming to an end around about 25 to 27. And I'm just looking at the document here where he's saying the capital value of the buildings is 57 billion. We've paid 80 billion already, and we're going to be paying more. And then on top of that, the contractual services is 160 billion. If the hospital wants to try and withdraw from a PFI agreement, it's extremely difficult, and they will absolutely take them to the cleaners, because you've got cash-strapped hospitals, not enough nurses, all the problems we've got. On top of that, this is a major business interest, and they will want to maximise profits, and they don't care about patients. So my suggestion is, I was chatting to someone earlier about how do we campaign, can we campaign, and they were saying, do we do postcards? But I'm just wondering, is there something we could all unite around on a campaign that we know is going to be coming up, and that we can start being proactive and just saying, scrap PFI? Because all that billion, I mean, we're talking about, look at the billions they've just stripped pensioners of winter fuel payment for pennies, really, when you've got all this money going to the private sector for no reason really, apart from their greed. And I think that's something we could focus together if people want. Do we have like a real campaign across Yorkshire, lobbying MPs, getting involved in unions, postcards, you name it, and we really put a lot of weight into this, and it might actually have some influence. We've got an end game. Because when we say trying to turn the NHS around, it's not privatisation, it's like an enormous thing that we're taking on. Whereas do we just look at one particular element where we could make good ground? And I actually think scrap PFI, it's a major issue, and it would save billions, and it's something we could really start being proactive about. Okay, so I'll leave that there. Thanks.
Thanks very much, and thanks very much for inviting us to this activist conference. Just like to say that, and thank you to the speakers. I think that I'm from this, Maddie and I are from the Save South Tyneside Hospital campaign, so a bit outside of Yorkshire, but very relevant to the north, and we don't have much opportunity to get to things in London. But I'd just like to say that I think that the whole characterization that's being made is that we've got a business orientated capital and public and private partnership, which they're trying, as you've just said, to destroy the public bit as fast as possible. And how we got into the campaign was some 6-7 years ago, and Mackie was involved there because Mackie was part of the government's reform and brought in these STPs. And if you look in Northumbria now, you have to go 40 miles to a proper hospital from Berwick right down to Cramlington. And that has caused the death of a lot of people. There's a huge distance now. And that was all done by Mackie through these STPs. And you now got Cramlington Hospital, which is a state-of-the-art acute hospital right next to the RBI. So then he's now been allowed to take over the RBI, and you can see that's that whole scenario. And it was that scenario, the STP, that they introduced into South Tyneside, and it brought about this path to excellence, so-called, which led to similar downgradings to Lewisham and other hospitals right around the country, and we fought that for several years. And anyway, the good news is that, you know, we did lose some services during phase 1, but they've had to stop this year. They stopped phase 2, which was to further downgrade things. And we did start to decided that, you know, from having regular demonstrations and public meetings, we went into actually engaging within the trusts and the ICBs and discussing with them our concerns, and that's where we are at the moment. So we've been having meetings with them, and one of the issues, there's many issues coming up that we're asking to review the services they've closed and so on. But the question you were talking about, the eye infirmary, that was a really important question, because the whole thing is we've got a very good eye infirmary, but they've opened Spa Medica a couple of years ago, and they're taking all the cataract operations. But even the trusts themselves are concerned about it because they're losing staff, they're losing contracts, and then they're unable to do all the routine procedures properly. So we had a meeting with them yesterday, and we just pointed out that, you know, with the crisis in the dental system, you're going to, this is how the NHS is going to end up. If you don't stop this privatisation and talking to the ICB, if you allow Medica to take over all these contracts, you won't have, you won't have a public system left in the area. So I think it's really important that we fight from all fronts. We produced a leaflet, which has updated the population about where we're at, what's been lost, what hasn't been lost, what we can fight for. But most importantly, we want to fight for a human-centered public healthcare system where the staff and all the people in the community are involved in making decisions, like the other gentleman said, that we should be in a position of actually influencing these decisions in the future. And we've also had the MPs involved in this struggle as well, and we're also asking to actually confront the ministers. We've encouraged the trust to also confront the ministers on this 10-year program, because you've already spoken about it. The three shifts, or the left shift they call it now, will be another disaster for the future of our healthcare system. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Roger. Just before Gary takes the microphone away from you, the engagement that different comp groups has with official bodies like the ICS board and what have you varies quite a lot, and some people find it difficult to interact because they don't really have a mechanism for doing so, and yet others, like Nottingham, for example, in your campaign, seem to have developed more of a working relationship where they will meet with you. So does several people from your campaign have regular meetings with someone from the IC board, or how does it work?
Well, we just simply decided to attend their meetings, either online or go there and actually start confronting them. And the thing is, do have a reputation, which helps. That you know, we took the CCG to a judicial review. So, and then we have. I think we've had 2 meetings this year, like personal meetings. One with the ICB, one with the trust, and then they decided to join together. So we've had a second one this week. So I think the interesting thing, one of the chief executive, although you know we've had really big fights with him, you know, over the years, but interestingly said, you can do things we can't do, because there's certain things we don't agree with what he does and what he says about a lot of things, but he does say we shouldn't be in this position where they're trying to use private companies to take over our services. So on that level, you know, you have like opposition. So I think that, yeah, it is an exchange. It doesn't mean to say that we won't, if they start shutting down services, we won't be opposing them. But I think that's the important thing, is to work on, take the struggle. You know, every time there's a place where you have to take the struggle into. So I think it's in our, you know, we've got a leaflet which updates people on what we're doing. So we're very open about what we're doing.
Okay, thanks very much. That's helpful, because public engagement opportunities seem to have got less and less, don't they? And so Reinhardt's comments about a more democratic NHS are highly relevant. Yeah. Yeah.
Labour's got a 10-year plan, as far as I know, and I've got my fingers crossed that they're going to make the NHS better. And now we were late coming in. I just wondered if anyone's got any information about the consultation period, or if it's not due to start, or if they don't leave it, or it feels a bit as if we've all given up already, but no, we haven't. Yay, great stuff.
It started, so you can go online, and there's
Is that what you're referring to?
there's sort of there's one consultation for organisation responses, and then there's one for individual responses, and it runs, I think, till early December.
2nd of December.
2nd of December. So there's plenty of time. It's quite limited in terms of the questions. It's like, what are the 3 best things about the NHS? What are the 3 biggest challenges?
Yeah.
Comp has prepared some model replies, if you like, so that ones that will bring it up privatisation and outsourcing as problems, and underfunding and lack of staffing. It's quite short. That will be distributed via one of our online newsletters. That now goes out about twice a month to about 30,000 people. And if you're not signed up for that, just when you go on the website, it's always ask you if you want to get the newsletter. But I would encourage people to respond, because I think, you know, if people don't draw to the attention the fact that they're unhappy about what Labour is saying, you know, it will be said, well, no one complained. Do I expect it to make a difference? No, not really. I mean, I don't think they're seriously saying that they'll be swayed by public opinion, because we already know from a lot of surveys that the vast majority of the public is against privatisation, wants to have a publicly funded and provided NHS. And it's very significant, I think, that in Labour's pre-election documents in the NHS, they're happy to talk about publicly funded, but they never mention publicly provided. And this would be absolutely consistent with a greater role for the private sector. So yeah, do have a look at the consultation. It doesn't take long to fill in. You might want to see the comp model answers. They're just suggestions, but the aim is to try and make it easier for people to do it. John.
Yeah, John Farley, Unite Community. Thanks, it's been a really good day. It's been a long time since I've been to one of these. So thanks for that. I was particularly interested in Amber's talk about making connections across things. Recently, we've been campaigning against the withdrawal of the winter fuel allowance. And if you haven't seen the photos of our Robber Reeves protest outside our office, have a look, they're over there on the table. And of course, things like that will have an impact on the health service because people will get cold and get ill. So we campaign, as many of you will probably know, we campaign around a variety of things. And we've recently decided we're going to start work on forming a new anti-cuts campaign, or whatever you want to call it. People said we should make it something positive, initially in Leeds, because as one of our members often says, the cavalry is not coming, so we have to organise our own cavalry. So of course we will. I think your idea about the PFI, that's a really good campaign. But just to flag that up, that we've only just started work on this, but we've already started talking to the Trades Council, other Unite branches, and we're going to start to and other unions already, and we're going to build it up. And just the idea of creating our own cavalry, so we can pool our forces where and when, because we're all a bit stretched. You know, we're here today, but there's at least 2 other things going on, and so it's just where we can work, together on things. That's just flagging that up, really. And anybody who's unwaged and you want to join a union, join Unite Community. Membership forms open.
Thanks very much, John. Yeah, good work by Unite Community. Zach.
Hi, I'm Zach. I'm a junior doctor working in Bradford. I was just thinking when we were talking about the private sector in terms of consultants working in the private sector, it might actually be difficult to target private companies and stop them from going about making money, but are there ways that we can deter the workforce from going into those positions, even though they've obviously there's a lot of pay to attract people? But I thought about influencing way before doctors get to that point, and is there a way of getting more information out to medical students or even just junior doctors so that the idea gets embedded a little bit earlier, and the reasons why they, those positions start to become attractive as they progress, that they think back and or have a foundation or a stronger belief as to why they wouldn't take up those positions, perhaps. And then the other thought was that I know this might be a bit more difficult, but any way of working towards making it difficult to practice privately. So any way that you could target campaign towards indemnity or things like that would make it difficult for, if you were taking up those positions, to get legal cover, things like that, just to make it less attractive, because we're all individuals, and I think going into, everyone, but most will have very sound morals, and I think that really the big companies might not, and if we can get the people that won't want to take up those positions, then that might help just not fill those gaps, and then they won't have an option because there won't be anyone to do them in the first place.
Yeah, good points. It's difficult answering them. I mean, how much you've recently finished medical school, so how much do you feel there was a sense of kind of solidarity around the ideas of a public NHS, and was that ever raised in during your 5 years at medical school?
No, but I tried to get in front of lectures before elections to talk to the students about it, but I think there could just be, there must be ways to just get the conversation going a little bit more, especially with the recent strike action with the junior doctors. I think everyone is a little bit more mobilised than maybe a few years ago. So I think the conversations can happen. It's just about working out how to happen.
Yeah, I mean, we quite a few years ago, we did have meetings in Freshers Week where I went along and spoke, and I think Nick, you came to one of them, if I remember correctly. Is that right? Yeah. And that was quite a good opportunity, but then that kind of disappeared. And then we had a very good joint meeting with the Medical Student Society with John Lister, but again, this is probably about 8 years. We've never been able to. The students obviously come and go, and you know, people who are willing to engage, we then lose contact with. But you're right, that's maybe something we should be thinking about and trying again. I mean, I don't know how much things have changed. I don't have a feel it's any longer, but I think when I was a medical student in the 70s, there was quite a strong feeling that we were all there to work in the NHS as a public system. But then, you know, in 1975, in the middle of my course, was the first big reorganisation of the NHS. And I think all of us at that point would have thought the NHS was there forever. You know, it's impregnable. No one's going to change it. And then, you know, look where we are now. So I think we certainly take your points, and they're important ones. Mike.
Just a couple of ideas going on from what Zach's just said and what you said, John. What about MedAct? It's a group of young medical students and doctors, and there was a meeting that you were present recently in the Playhouse, where their energy was very evident, and Sheffield was a very powerful group as well of MedAct. So that was one point I was going to make in terms of, you know, fighting back against the hollowing out of the NHS, and going back to that colleague from Newcastle, I don't know your name, Roger, and also a point that Rhian made towards the end of her very powerful speech. She seemed to be sticking up for she recognised the good nature of the people at the I suppose CEOs of trusts. Rhian, are you hearing me? Am I right in that you were defending them a little bit? You know, you recognising that they're good people. But so why don't we try to recruit them? Why aren't they here in this meeting today? You know, maybe they're susceptible to, you know, to solidarity with the, you know, because we're wanting good things, and they are as well, and they've got their hands tied, I guess, in a way that we don't. Somebody said that. Was it Roger that said that? So thanks.
Nigel wants to say something. I might come back to Rhian about, you know, how can we engage more with staff working in the NHS? We try, particularly through health campaigns together, but we don't draw the things. Nigel.
Yeah, well, my experience in the York Trust when I was in York was they were far from good people, executives and far from good people, and far from well intentioned. And there's been a problem with the unions. The unions were mentioned earlier. They're in abeyance, really, with the Labour government. There's been some kind of deal done with the TUC and the big unions, and that's going to take some time to process through. So, as a member of Unite Community, I'm another member of Unite Community. You know, we are trying to look at ways of influencing our union to disaffiliate from Labour, but that's incredibly difficult, because the bureaucracy just stands in your way the whole time. And the TUC to take a better position, well, that's incredibly difficult because they don't listen to trades councils. I'm co-secretary of Colville Trades Council. They don't listen to trades councils. There's no democracy. That's what I'm saying. So on the subject of democracy, I think I could have been at another meeting today, which was a meeting of an organisation called Collective. And Collective is trying to bring together all the left kind of groups in the country to try and build a political alternative to the Labour Party. The left is in a desperate situation. I won't go on into a talk about that. Obviously, it's a huge subject. The left is in a desperate situation. But I think with Collective, it's the closest I've seen to a real attempt to bring the left together. All sorts of different organisations are there today from a real wide spectrum. Collectives come out of, if you like, the Corbyn movement and the remnants of that. And it's at the moment not particularly, it's just very, very new. But the groups who are going in are quite experienced and well known, and from all over the country. I think we need a political alternative. We can do other things. I mean, the PFI idea. I mean, it's a national emergency. Declare a national emergency and do something about PFI. But they're not going to do that. And we've heard from the platform, you know, despondency about where Labour is going. They won't listen to a consultation. Labour councillor friend of mine raised that question. Why do we consult? We never take any notice of what the people say. And he was whipped for that because he said it in one of his first council meetings. So I would see a political alternative as another way, alongside the other things we're trying to do. Yeah, that's all I've got to say.
I mean, one of the demands of the I think it's Build Back Britain campaign is to take private healthcare facilities under government control and use them for the NHS, which I think is actually a very legitimate demand, particularly given the crisis that we're in. It's not something COMP has called for, but I wonder if we should be asking for that. Gilda.
Just wanted to say something, talking about linking up with organisations and also challenging the political narrative. I'm the Secretary of End Social Care Disgrace, which is a national organisation, and of course social care is almost entirely privatised. So we're very much on the same track and trying to fight back over that. And we do have a meeting next Monday, just in about 9 days' time, in Parliament, which John McDonnell's chairing for us. And he himself has said he'll do what he can. And we've got some cross-party, the Greens, SNP, and that coming to that meeting from the MPs. But he is with us entirely on, you know, we can do what we can there, but we have to build a grassroots movement. That, you know, you can't just change this from the top. And just wanted to say on the business of picking up a bit here on not necessarily having another party, but we've talked, you know, it's about challenging neoliberalism. And if you talk to people about that, they, you know, it sounds just jargon. But if you talk to people, I'm also in the National Pensioners Convention, I've been involved with the Winter Fuel. If you talk to people about, you know, you go to shops and you have to go to the tills, you can't go to the bank because they're closing that down. You can't go to the post office sometimes and get your money, it's all on the internet. You're talking about not just the NHS being hollowed out, but our society being hollowed out of personal interactions. And that goes across the NHS. The NHS, as Rhian said powerfully, desperately trying to do that, to be there for people and to put people first. But I think we have to somehow take to the public that argument against neoliberalism, which is about we have to turn society upside down a bit, the old socialist principles, and try and get to a society where people matter and the transactions between people matter. And that's the root of what we say. And put at a very simple level, people can understand that. So just wanted to throw that in. And as cross organisations, I mean, and Social Care Disgrace is almost a sister organisation to COMP, but it is much broader than that. It's got a lot of, it's the only across the board social care organisation, I think, that represents everybody. So there is a lot of joining up to do. And lastly, if I don't get a chance to say it at the end, on the privatisation, we're desperate in Leeds, scratching our heads of little things you can do on the ground with the public. And a couple of years ago, in fact twice, we did Santa's Grotto, you know, with a big sack and everybody dressed up and a bit of music, and even John in an elf costume, I think, along with Rob Baker. And we did a bit of a sort of mock street theatre, handing out the contracts to people. That was because of COVID, and we could do all those kind of masks, contracts and everything else. But we thought we'll have another go at it this year somehow, because I think because the government keeps saying we're throwing money at the NHS, we know they're not. We know the hospitals are massive bills for sewage is leaking and God knows what. It's nowhere near enough. But people hear all the time it's got a lot of money. So personally, I think over the next 6 months, looking over this immediate period, we have to hammer away at privatisation and at the loss of the NHS, and hammer away at hollowing out this society into something none of us chose.
I should mention, you know, I had or LTHT had 114 sewage leaks in 1 year. So when Starmer said we can't turn the spending taps on until we fix the plumbing, I thought that was particularly relevant to the infirmary.
Hello, Jennifer Bevan. Thank you very much for a very good afternoon. I think the fundamental argument that we have to win, and this is basic to winning the argument about PFI, is Rachel Reeves and the Labour government saying there is no money. It simply isn't true. And we all ought to arm ourselves with the arguments to counter that statement that there is no money. Because if there is money, and there is, the government cannot run out of money. We have our own sovereign currency. We might run out of resources, but we cannot run out of money to buy them. Then the PFI argument falls, and you've completely undermined it. There is no need for it, and that's what we have to do, I think. So watch out for writers like Richard J. Murphy and Steve Keen and other economists who are begging you to believe that this argument that there is no money is simply untrue. It's a neoliberal con.
Very important point.
I'll be very brief. There was enough money to give a contract to a private equity company for community services just the other week to the tune of £1.3 billion. So there's plenty of money there.
Thanks, Jack. Before Reinhard, can I? Okay, Reinhard, and then I'm just going to ask Ria if she would.
Yeah, I suggest that we need to work more with artists and maybe advertisers who want to have a good society, because this experience that unnecessary cataract surgery is performed is well known. I mean, there's lots of evidence in private services that unnecessary hysterectomies are done, unnecessary other operation, tonsillectomies, etc., etc. So, but the public often doesn't understand it, and maybe even medical students do not understand it. So I think it's important to have short clips, making it funny, but also terrifying, and to make the public aware and make staff aware what is happening once the health services are privatized in order to mobilize them. Thank you.
Thanks, Reinhard. So I was going to ask Ryan if you would be able to comment on how we can connect more with health workers. And I am going to ask Emma something different.
Just to respond to the chief executive thing, no. So I think that the executive teams in NHS trusts have a big part to play, but I think they could do a heck of a lot more. I think they'll let it all filter through to us. And
but if they would, if they were giving, if they were exposed, if they'd been here today, would they have understood what we were saying? Or
they know.
They know. So what stops them now?
Well, the career point here, with trade union organisations, so you've got to engage with them.
Through the unions.
Well, through the unions, but
Could you take the mic?
Yeah, we can't really have.
no, sorry.
Charlie, pub, if you can spare half an hour.
Engagement. The only way to engage with NHS workers now is to be brutally honest. We need to show them what we are talking about today, because it doesn't filter through to them. It filters through to me because I see it and I know it, and it filters through to people other activists who are out there trying to fight the same fight. But there is an element of protection, and I mean protection of themselves because of how they're working. They don't understand how they're working. They keep being told, and this is not just in Leeds, this is across NHS England. They keep being told that we just need to work hard, and we need to, and this is what governments are telling our staff as well, work harder. We need, it's that machine, it's the whole thing that I was talking about at the beginning when I said it's the timeline, but none of that involves the patient. This is all about facts, figures, and we need to lay it out there. We need to show them some real hard campaigns, visual. It needs to be visual. We need to be more visual, and I've got some ideas if anyone wants to listen to them. Not right now, because I've just bored you to death. But I really do think that's the way forward when Amber was one of our organisers in the strikes, and when we went round wards and ward walking, it was the cold hard facts that encouraged people to come out on strike. And especially the one where we said, well, actually, you know, I don't want to leave my patients. No, nurse, I cried. Within 2 minutes of being out on strike, I was stood sobbing. And one of our directors was, I'm really sorry, and I was like, well, you need to help us stop it, then you need to help raise our voice. But then they can't do that. But we can. And one of the facts that I used to say to our members was, just remember that today, your patients are legally kept safe. Tomorrow, they're not. Today, they're not. Only on a strike day. So for me, I'd be on strike every day if it means keeping my patients safe. But I think there's something about visual things, and I think that's what really, really draws people in, and especially for nurses, and whether that's visual facts, whether it's sometimes pictures. There's, you know, I'm aware of the RCN are in the middle of launching a campaign that obviously I can't share anything about, but it's going to be impactful.
Oh, go on, you with.
I honestly can't. It's going to be really good though. It is going to be really good. Yeah, it is going to be really good. But I think that's the way to get out to them.
Okay, thanks, Jane. Amber, would you say something about the get Palantir out of the NHS?
Yeah, I can. So there's a national launch that's, or a national campaign that's just been launched last week, a few days ago. And it's been, for the last year, health workers for Free Palestine and health workers for Palestine, two separate groups, very similar names, have been working together across the country, and we've been working with them with Corporate Watch. We've recently joined up with MedAct and Just Treatment in a coalition, and I think there's another few people involved, or another few organisations involved, and then there's like other Palestine solidarity activists have come in to form a coalition, really just to give it the infrastructure to launch this campaign, we've launched a toolkit, which is about saying no to Palantir, which is a big tech company in the NHS. It's just recently, last November, it won the £330 million contract to integrate data for the whole of NHS England. This company is also using its AI technology and its data analytics. It's supplying those to the Israeli military at the moment, which is why we see such devastation in Gaza and Lebanon now. It's because the weapons are extremely high tech, even though there's such devastation. But they're really, really high tech, and the technology for that is coming from big tech companies such as Palantir, who are now in the NHS. So this is like speeding through it. The campaign, like I was kind of showing earlier on, it links loads of different issues together. So it's about NHS privatisation, which is one of the demands of the campaign. So we've done our research, and there are demands. One is stop the privatisation and outsourcing and asset stripping of the NHS. The other one is no companies like this in the NHS ever again, and not now. And I can't remember on the spot what the other one is, but I'm trying to say it's a really broad campaign, trying to get a broad alliance and coalition of people involved in it, which makes all of those demands stronger. So the idea is that local groups take this toolkit, which is a year of research and trying to understand what this data platform looks like, what our leverage is at a local level, what NHS staff's leverage is, what patients' leverage is, how we do that, how we organise together at local levels, and how we join staff and patient, and so it's community organising plus worker organising. All of this, we put it into the toolkit to make it really, really accessible for anyone in the country, and we're providing kind of support for local organising, and we're also going to feed in some, if anyone has like really good experiences of doing that at the local level, at their trust, we're then going to feed that back in centrally and push that information out to anyone else organising in the country. So I don't know if I'm kind of giving an overview of what it looks like, but basically if people want to get involved in anything like that, or just I'm giving an example of an idea of how a campaign like this works cross issue, even though it's not, all these issues are connected, but also how we envision where our power is, which is really bottom up, community, worker linked, organising together and finding out where we're strongest. and making sure we're being really strategic about it, which is where the research has come in. We know exactly where we can push, we know exactly how it's going to work, we know exactly what we need to sabotage the rollout and how that feeds into the bigger demands around privatisation and around kind of BDS and the NHS and other issues. So we've done that. And it's taken a while and it's been relationship building, and I'm not an NHS staff member, and I think from looking at what it would look like for engagement from a patient perspective or like just a community member perspective, for me it's been going to health workers organising together, say in Medact or Health Workers for Free Palestine, and saying, I'm here, you know best, I'm going to join in, what can I do? And I have these resources and I'll help out. And then building relationships, you get to a place where you can have honest conversations, and whether you're not trying to like convert someone to your idea or whatever, you know what I mean? It's just like more real, sustainable way of organising. Yeah, I'll stop talking now.
Okay, that was great. So the toolkit, we get volunteer out of the NHS is on the Medact website amongst other places, but that's probably the easiest place to find it. That's a good place to finish, and I think. So I just, I think because we're actually late, we do have to wind up, but I'd really like to thank everyone very much for coming and participating, particularly some people who travelled a long way, like Roger and his colleague, but all of you who've given up other things to come make this a very useful and positive meeting. I think it's worked very well. So if anyone wants to meet up in the pub, it is the Town Hall Tavern, which is fairly easy to find. It's a little bit down from the Leeds Town Hall.
We could walk as a group, John, if you want.
Well,
Nick's volunteered to lead the brigade
yeah.
in about 5 to 10 minutes if we gather over there.
We weren't able to book any space there, but they thought this time of the evening there wouldn't be a problem with finding space. So you're very welcome if you'd like to do that. And then some of the is going to have to do the clearing up in here, which I don't think will take too long. So thank you very much, Gilda.
Thank you, John, for touring.
Yeah.